The ultimate issue here is not the projection of U.S. power. The real issue is world commerce and the well-being of dozens of states who trade with that part of the world. This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I would like to welcome you to a special edition of Fair Game. June 17, President Donald Trump announced a memorandum of understanding with the Islamic Republic of Iran to bring hostilities to a close in the latest war. As soon as the details became available, a storm of controversy erupted on both the left and the right. Some of the things are obvious enough, like paying Iran $300 billion in reparations for 47 years of being the world's leading terrorist state, which almost seems like bounty for killing Jews. There are other parts of the agreement that are less obvious to the modern reader, but one of them that I think bears a great deal of examination has to do with lifting the blockade and then leaving the ultimate disposition of the strait to Iran and Oman. Now, there's an obvious problem here, and that's what we are about to talk about. With one of my oldest and dearest friends, Harold E. Stark, known since birth as Pete. And Pete Stark and I go all the way back to high school in Bel Air, Maryland. We went to a high school where nothing much ever happened except for two things. Number one of our fellow alumni is John Wilkes Booth.
Yes.
So that's not famous, that's notorious. And then in our senior year of high school, the black radical H. Rap Brown was tried in our little county seat town for trying to blow up the courthouse in Cambridge, Maryland, which caused a descent of journalists from around the world, including Peter Jennings of ABC News. However, in terms of our lives, I think what was most memorable is that we first got acquainted, I think, in a history class in 10th grade.
Yes, we did.
And we were part of founding the Civil War Club, which was a group of history nerds who refought all the battles of the Civil War, led by a teacher whose name was, ironically, Robert E. Lee Ross. That should let you know which side he favored. And we trekked all over the battlefields of the Eastern Theater.
We did indeed.
Pete and I still do that as much as you can at this advanced stage of life. We can still do it, we just do it slower.
Yes, but that lets us see a lot more.
That's exactly right. Well, Pete, in his career, has become an imposing historian, not just of the United States Navy, but of the British Navy during the time of Napoleon, all of which seems a little bit arcane and perhaps a bit irrelevant to the MOU with Iran, except it isn't. Pete, what is wrong with letting Iran decide what happens in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the first thing you've done there is to basically give an open waterway, an international waterway, I believe it's 40 miles wide, something close to that, to the jurisdiction of two countries, one of which is very problematic in U.S. history. I would say that that never really ends well, because it's a commerce issue. If you look over history, some of the things, in fact, the United States got involved in its first war after we were the United States and the Constitution with the Barbary so-called pirates, but the Barbary states in the Mediterranean, North Africa. Why? Because they were stopping our ships in an international waterway called the Mediterranean Sea. They were stopping and capturing them. Because we had no navy, they could do this whenever they wanted. Now,
And charge whatever they wanted.
and charge whatever they wanted, and they charged a fair amount. Even when we won, they charged a fair amount, which is an interesting similarity to what's going on today in Iran. After you and I had chatted, I went back and checked some of my sources, and when we retrieved, if you will, the crew of a ship that had run aground outside of Tripoli, that whole crew cost us the amount of $60,000 at the time. Now, that's not chump change.
How much would that be today?
I don't know, but if you think about it...
At least $2.5 million, I would think.
Oh, I would think maybe even more. I mean, $2,500 for a country that had basically no economy, or one that was just beginning to recover under the watchful eye a little bit earlier of Alexander Hamilton. You really would have a hard time in justifying that. But people were involved. We've seen hostage situations before. And therefore, we retrieved roughly 300 of our sailors and officers.
Wait a minute. So we are not even 20 years old.
Correct.
As a nation.
Right.
20 years after the adoption of the Constitution. And you're saying that the Barbary states were holding more than 300 U.S. military personnel.
Yes.
Okay.
They were captured when the USS Philadelphia ran aground in Tripoli Harbor. Unfortunately, they obviously weren't able to refloat her. Captain Bainbridge, William Bainbridge, and his entire crew were essentially put into prison. I think some of the crew, if I remember right, were probably used as menial labor by the Tripolitans at the time. But this was a factor in many things that were going on, is that what do we do about these 300 men that were captured, and is anything we're going to do put them in danger? We bombarded that the Tripoli harbor of Tripoli, and in fact, a cannonball came really close to William Bainbridge while he was in his quarters there.
So I'm curious about this. Iran held 54 U.S. hostages in 1979-80 and
Right.
into January of 81, 444 days.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States really was like a bull on a barbed wire fence. There really wasn't much way to get off.
Right.
And ultimately, the prospect of having to deal with Ronald Reagan caused the Ayatollah to release those hostages.
Right.
But if you go back to this story, what was at stake? I mean, why don't you just take the easy way and pay them off?
Well, and I think part of that, I think what you have to look at, Gary, here is that you had a situation whereas we had been in the Mediterranean for several years. Some of it had been a success. Morocco, Algeria, pretty much a success at that point. Tripoli was the holdout. They really were the ones that were not going to essentially make a deal just because one of our heavy frigates was sitting in their sitting outside their harbor, trying to bombard it periodically. So I think you had a situation where it was, are we going to get anything more by doing what we're doing? And the fact that you still have 300 of our people. Can we get a treaty that releases these men back to us? We need them. It's a good thing. And on the Tripoli side, it's what can we get out of this as well, which ended up to be the equivalent, whatever their currency was at the time, of $60,000.
So,
and it was over.
so again, going back to that time, the United States is essentially being held hostage as a country to a state of somewhat dubious legal standing. And President Jefferson understands, because he has been a foreign minister to France,
Yes.
and had worked very closely with the French. He had been Secretary of State under President Washington. Jefferson essentially decides that we're going to have to build a navy.
Yes.
Why do you build a navy in that particular situation?
Well, let me take you back a little bit. The first person who wanted to build the Navy was George Washington, because these things were happening. Remember, when we were under the Crown, the British Crown, there was a pretty good-sized Navy there that was protecting our commerce. Why? Because it was British commerce. We're no longer British commerce. The British have other things to do in the Mediterranean at this
Like deal with
point.
Napoleon.
Yes, deal with Napoleon, who is beginning to make himself felt. And all of a sudden, here's this new flag that is flying in the Mediterranean. And the Barbary states are saying, there might be some money in this for us. And they start capturing our merchant ships. They also begin to, of course, imprison or sell into internal slavery the crew from these ships. And so Algeria at the time was the biggest offender that we were seeing. What Washington did was to authorize the building of 6 heavy frigates.
Sailing ships.
Sailing ships, 44 guns, 38 guns, enough to give a fairly decent presence with the United States in these waters. However,
The real focus isn't the Atlantic. The real focus at this stage is protecting American commerce, open seas,
Yes.
what's often called freedom of the seas, in the Mediterranean.
that is correct. We felt that we had the right to sail our ships and utilize them for every bit of commerce that we could, just like any other country would. It's a commerce issue. Remember what happens when your ships begin to be taken. Certainly the owners of those ships take a hit, but the owners of all the other ships begin to take a hit because insurance rates go up. You may or may not be able to sell your wares if you have a problem getting through. The British certainly aren't going to say, well, we're going to help you. We're very, very much on our own at that point.
So let's come forward
Sure.
to 2026.
Right.
What is at stake with the United States allowing Iran to install toll booths in the Straits of Hormuz?
Well, I guess it's a plug for Easy Pass because you're going to have to be able to collect it somehow. But, you know, seriously, what we would have done, or what we would do in that point, is we're effectively giving ownership. If I can
To
collect
something we don't have the right to give ownership to.
Exactly.
It's international waters.
Well, think about it. If you're collecting a toll, you're letting somebody use something that you own. There's an agreement there that I own it, you want to use it, this $2-3 to get across the Bay Bridge because the state of Maryland owns it. Yeah, that's pretty fair. However, the Chesapeake Bay isn't an international waterways like the Straits of Hormuz. If you look at the news every night, and I'm getting tired of seeing them, frankly, are all of the ships that are backed up either on one side or another because they're afraid to go through. Why are they afraid to go through? Well, we've done a lot of damage to the Iranian Navy, no question about it. I give credit where credit's due. However, the drone issue is causing a real problem. A tanker was hit a couple of days ago. It's not only tankers that are going out with oil, but remember, it has to be other ships coming in with wares, if you will. Commerce, it's goods. So it's not just the flow of oil, and I think that we often forget about the flow of other items that
the
need
fact
to come
that
in
none
as
of
well.
those Gulf states have highly developed economies.
Right,
They don't have much manufacturing,
right,
and so they are heavily dependent on China, India, Japan, and some of the Western countries.
exactly.
Okay, so to simplify this for the person who is just tuning into this issue for the first time, number one, we have a supply chain issue.
Yes,
Right, there are vital supplies that are needed by all of the Gulf states' trading partners, and there are goods and services that are required in the Gulf states. Now that's all gotten uncertain.
yes,
You're going to see a spike in the insurance rates,
right,
and that means a spike at the gas pump for every American, and in reality, everybody who depends on oil-based transportation or oil-based products.
correct. Now, the good thing this time around, of course, is that if you compare it with 1973, is that the United States is pumping a lot more oil than we used to. There are alternative ways of getting oil out of the Gulf, not as effective as shipping, but there are pipelines out of the Gulf.
And there will be more.
And there will be. So, you know, I think we have to weigh these, weigh the current situation against what we've seen before and what you and I grew up with. But again, I was looking the other day. There is a letter from Lord Nelson to one of his captains. Lord Horatio Nelson is the greatest leader of naval leader in British history. He was writing a letter to one of his captains who was in Naples, and effectively was saying, I understand that one of my frigates, one of my smaller ships, 36 guns, was in Naples and not here at Malta. And he says, I'm really upset because the convoys of merchant ships are here at Malta and there's no one to convoy them. If we don't do this, I'm going to have the merchants on my back. So here's the man who is in charge of making sure that Napoleon's fleet doesn't do anything bad. His main concern at this point is the British commerce in the Mediterranean, and saying, I want that frigate back so that we can do this convoy so that the insurance rates don't go up any more than they are, and so that the commerce can flow and people can get their goods, and the merchants won't be writing nasty letters to the First Lord of the Admiralty.
So,
Think about it in today's world as well, Gary.
the ultimate issue here is not the projection of U.S. power in the Gulf. The real issue is world commerce and the well-being of dozens of states who trade with that part of the world. So, President Stark, the easiest thing for us to do is to take pot shots at Donald Trump, and he makes an awfully attractive target sometimes because he puts his foot in his mouth so often, and it seems at times that he only takes the foot out in order to replace it with the other one. But I digress. President Stark, what are your options? What is a different path that the United States could pursue to resolve the issue in the Gulf?
I think there are a couple things, Gary, that we need to look at. And first of all, certainly the current administration is under in a very difficult situation with regard to Iran. And we've basically been there for 49 years or more. I think that there indeed does have to be a treaty, just like there was a treaty with the Tripolitans 200 and some odd years ago. However, you back that treaty up with the force that's necessary.
Back up on that one.
Okay.
Back up on that one. Say that again.
You would need a treaty with the Iranians, possibly even with the Omanians, to ensure that there is recognition that the Straits of Hormuz are an international waterway, and it needs to be backed up with force.
So where we've been the last 4 months, we announce a blockade.
Right?
And Iran announces they're closing the strait.
Right.
We now have an MOU, but in the couple of weeks since it was signed, Iran has closed the strait on multiple occasions in clear violation of the memorandum of understanding.
Right.
And that is their posturing to let the world know that from their vantage point, international law may say this is international waters, but their viewpoint is this belongs to us.
Yes.
The only way to deal with that, you're saying, is you have a treaty that has clear terms and conditions,
Right.
and it is backed up by United States military might.
Yes. Going back to my earlier historical example, during the War of 1812, when we were engaged elsewhere, the Barbary pirates decided to do it again. They started taking our ships, and we had to send another squadron back to the Mediterranean in 1815 to deal with this. I don't see us getting to the point where we would be able to remove completely a naval force from the Persian Gulf area anytime soon. I think that it shows resolve on our part. It goes back to the Reagan, trust but verify. Well, we're going to verify it with the presence of our fleet, or at least a heavy squadron of our fleet. And the thing that this is going to demonstrate is that we are the tool to keep the international roads of commerce open. And I'm thinking about China now. And
yeah, because this is important.
Yeah.
Because there's a linkage.
Yes.
We are not working in a vacuum in the Middle East.
Right.
China and Russia are watching every move the United States makes, and China has a long-standing claim on Taiwan.
Yes.
The Taiwanese do not want to live under a communist government. And there was a little document that was enacted by 13 states in the Second Continental Congress called the Declaration of Independence that says that when people feel ill-served by government, they may dissolve the bonds between them. Taiwanese believe that being under a communist government does not serve them well.
Right.
They don't wish to be under them. They have never been under them. This is nothing but Chinese imperialism. And so, back to your point, clearly stated treaties with clear terms and conditions, supported by the judicious and consistent presence of the United States Navy. What happens in the Gulf is sure to influence what happens in international waters between Taiwan and China. I want to thank my dear friend Pete Stark for joining us today. Joe Scarborough has John Meacham, and Fair Game has Pete Stark.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, my
It's been
dear
a pleasure.
friend. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking. We want to invite you into the conversation. This is important. It's ongoing. We'll be talking about it more in the days to come. For now, this is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I want to thank you for joining us today for Fair Game.